Okay, hello there. Welcome to the podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted and fascinated to be joined by Dorothy Max Prior, who's got an awful lot of stories to tell, which have just some of which I would say have just been brought into your memoirs, haven't they, Max? 69 Exhibition Street. So, firstly, thank you for coming along, and I'm really looking forward to this. So, hello.
Hello, my pleasure to be here. And yes, the memoir is 69 Exhibition Road, and it's subtitled 12 True Life Tales from the Fag End of Punk, Porn and Performance. I think I've got that right. And it's coming out really soon on Strange Attractor. So there you go. I've got the ad out of the way immediately. So that's done.
It's that's the sort of title that's bound to attract curiosity, I would have thought. It's certainly, I'd notice it if I was in a bookshop, I think. Yeah. Okay. So where I always start with these things is to ask you a little bit about your upbringing, and so how you grew up, where you grew up, or whatever, and it's with particular kind of emphasis, I suppose, on anything that might have ended up pushing you in the directions that you've subsequently gone in life.
Okay. Well, I'm a South London girl, working class South London. Although by the time I got to my teenage years, it was working class made good. My car mechanic dad had sort of shoved himself up into being a coachworks manager of South London Motors, where he looked after the cars of lots of famous footballers, the whole of the Chelsea team. So, had Peter Bonetti around my house when I was little, and that would impress some people, not many, maybe, and various boxers and wrestlers. So that was the sort of background, kind of working class, but not poor working class, all right working class. But my dad was a true rambunctious Cockney, and my mum's Irish, yeah, that's it. I've got one brother who's 5 years younger, who we were never particularly close. Thinking about how things kind of went the way they did. Well, I've always been a dancer. I've always done dancing of all sorts. I've been dancing on a stage in front of people since I was 5 or 6 years old. I did Irish dancing, and I was a competition dancer. So I often say, even though I ended up playing drums in bands, actually, dancing is really the core of it. That came first. That came after the drumming. And I kind of think of drumming as another form of dancing. Really, it's obviously all about rhythm and patterns of rhythm, and is especially things like Irish dancing are really percussive. So there's that. Then I suppose other sort of key things, well, like a lot of people my age. So I was born in 1955. So by the time I hit teenage years, the end of the 1960s, was kind of I saw Tyrannasuarus Rex in one of their, when it was just like a couple of them, playing in small, I think they were at my local youth club actually. And I saw things like Pink Floyd at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon, and bought loads of singles, obviously all the glam rock singles. And then Bowie was the big one. Became a massive Bowie fan again. That's not untypical of somebody my age. And of course, he came from not far away. He came from he's also a South Londoner. He was born in Brixton and then brought up in Beckenham, I believe. I went to a convent school. Very, say, Irish Catholic kind of background. I was in Catholic education until I was 19. So it was, I suppose, inevitable that I would become a punk rocker and a go-go dancer and stripper. I mean, what else do convent girls do? Is that enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Whereabouts in South London were you?
Well, I always say Crystal Palace because I actually come from Gypsy Hill, which is halfway between Crystal Palace and sort of Dulwich, Brixton, but nobody's ever heard of Gypsy Hill. So I always say Crystal Palace because everybody's heard of that. Because the dinosaurs and
Oh, sure. I'm familiar with all of those areas. Yeah.
Oh, are you from that part of the world?
I grew up in Bromley. Yeah.
Ah, you're an actual Bromley kid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for my sins, really. Yeah. So I was quite interested then. So in the kind of pre-punk time, were you say you became a punk rocker? Were you anything else before that, or were you just waiting for punk rock?
I mean, I'm using the term punk rock as this kind of shorthand for something that people recognise. Obviously, we didn't call it that.
No.
Peter York coined the term them to describe this strange subculture that was growing in London in the mid 1970s, so 74, 75. You know, there was stuff happening, and most of it was actually happening in the gay clubs. So that those were the places that I was going. You know, all the kind of usual shagaramas that became the Roxy, Yours or Mine, also called the Sombrero, the Pink Pig. You know, so my yeah, not really while I was still living at home, but as soon as I kind of hit 17, 18 and left school, that's you know, that's where I started to go, and also of course sing live music as well. Yeah.
Did you feel you were part of a counterculture? Because obviously most people your generation didn't go to all those places. So.
I mean, I certainly had a sense of otherness. I mean, I identified as bisexual, as we'd say now. I mean, now I think the term that would be used would be queer or questioning. You know, I just knew that I was kind of different. I mean, I didn't really have, I had sort of girlfriends rather than boyfriends at school, but it was, you know, as again, you wouldn't necessarily define yourself as gay at the time. It was just that I just knew that I knew that I wasn't kind of quite like a lot of the other girls. And then, of course, as soon as I got into the whole gay scene, then I found that I really had found somewhere where I belong. So I think the term at the time as well would have been fag hag, which was obviously slightly derogatory, but also we embraced it, you know. But we didn't really use the word queer. That's become reclaimed later. But I think now the notion that you could be not really sure what you are, just know that you're not completely straight sexually or in your gender identification, that's all pretty normal stuff these days. That's you know, probably half the teenage population. But I just been to see Moon Age Daydream actually, and it was really interesting. Whenever and there's not many times that Bowie will get drawn on his claim to be bisexual, you know, but when he does speak about it, he does talk in terms of not wishing to kind of fit into other people's pigeonholes on gender, and I think that's probably the stronger part of it, rather than who you're actually kind of going to bed with. Like with Bowie, I mean, but you know, similarly to me, you know, his two marriages are two people of the opposite sex, you know, but that I don't think that takes away your identity as somebody who's, you know, bisexual or queer or gender fluid or whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Yeah. Was it problematic? Because it certainly wasn't accepted back then the way it is now.
As a girl, of course, it's completely okay to walk down the street holding hands with a girl and to sort of have sleepovers with girls and things. Nobody thinks anything of it. So actually, if you don't say anything, nobody really knows anything very much. So there's that. I did have these kind of schoolgirl romances with other schoolgirls, but it was very easy to hide it, and it was very normal within a kind of girls' convent school as well.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you know, yeah. It wasn't abnormal, you know.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about a world that I know very little about, really, which is kind of how you became a stripper.
I was friends with a wonderful couple called Ted Polhemus and Lynn Proctor, who were very much kind of ahead of the game stylistically. I met Lynn at the ICA. That's how I started working at the ICA. And through Lynn worked as a stripper and go-go dancer. So it was through Ted and Lynn that I went to see Lynn at work, and then Ted took me to various kind of pubs and things. And then it just came up, you know, when I was just moaning about having no money, I think, to them. And then it just came up as this idea, okay, well, you know, why don't you try this? and it turned out to be the kind of easiest thing in the world once you get over that first gig. And as I said earlier, I've been performing on stage since I was 6 years old, so obviously it's a bit different. But Irish dancing, jazz dancing, I've done experimental contemporary dance and tap and stage dance. I've done performances in old people's homes, so I was actually used to taking the stage, so it just became a really easy choice, very much off the moment, because it was kind of very much part of this sort of anti-hippie thing of you didn't have to wait for the revolution. You could just kind of play the system at its own games, and it was okay to make money. I think that was part of this kind of anti-hippie vibe that was part of the pre-punk thing with no name that eventually got called punk.
To the best of my memory, and this is very much on the edges of my memory, really, some of those places, pubs that had strippers, were quite rough and seedy joints. Was that a fair comment?
Quite a lot were, but I started work for this agency, and after I did quite a lot of the horrible jobs in the first few months, but the thing was, once you'd kind of established yourself and had established a certain kind of popularity and a certain reputation, then you could be picky about where you went. So I actually stopped doing the evenings, because they were often much rougher. I stopped doing private parties unless they were really posh, jumping out of a cake kind of things. I certainly didn't do all these kind of really, the places I did in the first few months. Yes, I mean, really terrible pubs in New Cross or in the old.
I was thinking about New Cross, actually. Yeah.
Oh my God! And the Docklands, there's a few awful ones. Obviously Docklands, long before it became what the Docklands is now. There were some places where you really wouldn't want to be walking down this completely deserted, horrible, road at 11 o'clock at night, having worked in a really rowdy pub there. The other thing I'll say, partly because I looked younger than my years anyway, when I had these conversations with Ted and Lynn about how I was going to kind of sell myself and present myself as a go-go dancer. It was go-go dancing initially, and then it kind of moved into stripping. But the conversations I had were very much around, how I could present myself in the best way to play the game, really. And because I was 21 and I looked younger than that, so I very much I went for a fairly sort of sweet and innocent kind of look a lot of the time. Not always, but I mean, I had lots of different characters that I played. But yeah, I kind of established this persona, quite a nice girl sort of persona, and that's like a kind of guardian angel. That's a sort of protecting veil. Because if anyone gets out of hand, then you've got other people. I mean, that's the other thing. You learn to play the room. It's not that different to being in bands, actually, or to doing any sort of performance that doesn't have a fourth wall, where you're in direct relationship with the audience. You learn to play the room. So if somebody's stepping out of hand, shouting really crude remarks or worse, or trying to touch you, then you've got other people that you can turn to, that you either verbally or just non-verbally make it clear that you need a bit of support, and obviously you've got bar staff and DJs and things like that. So actually I didn't, let's say a couple of kind of rough places and places I wouldn't want to go back to, but nothing actually happened to me that that was really terrible or anything, or that I didn't feel I could cope with. I felt I had coping mechanisms. And you're in a position of power, as the other thing to say. It's an interesting thing. You are mostly, particularly if you reminded yourself of that and retain that kind of persona, you are in a position of power. You're the performer. You can actually stop the show if you don't know what's happening. You can not go back. So there are all sorts of devices to use.
Was it difficult for your parents?
Oh, they didn't know. My God.
Ah.
No, they didn't know. No, the old Irish Catholic family.
Yeah.
And I did a couple of jobs. I did one. My parents by now had moved out of South London, were down in Haywards Heath, and there was a place called the Ship in Brighton that I did really occasionally. I was always really worried in case some sort of family friends or something would turn up. And I once did a party that was near Gatwick Airport. And by now, my dad wasn't working in the motor trade anymore and was working at Gatwick Airport. And I was having kittens in case, you know, he or anyone he knew would be around. But anyway, there was only a couple of things like that. But no. And the thing about these times, because there's no internet or anything, and you can just have different names for different things. I mean, I was just never mind the 3 faces of Eve. It was like the you know, the 10 names of Dorothy, Max, you know, Dee Dee, Miss Delight, Lola was another. You know, I had all these different names for different things I was doing in life, and they didn't really cross over in a way that'd be really, really difficult to maintain nowadays, because everything's out there, isn't it, on Instagram, and everything's, you know, or wherever, you know, and you can just track people really easily. Most people, anyway. You might have followed the saga of me trying to find Alex Ferguson last year. It's kind
yes,
of, yeah. When he has turned up, but it is quite extraordinary how someone can disappear in this age of the.
It's an achievement, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Achievement. I'm really impressed. When I do see him again, which I hope I will one day, I'm going to ask him how he did it. That was quite astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably a novel to be written about something like that, I would think.
Yeah.
I noticed he'd done an interview with somebody, hadn't he? So.
Frank, whose second name, Frank Meyer or Meyer from V2O, is it? A sort of dedicated TG and PTV fan who's got a massive archive and I think runs a magazine and runs this and that and the other. Yeah.
On a related note to all that, you roll up at the ICA with Ted and Lynn. So that wasn't actually where it is now, was it, back then? Because now it's in the Mall, of course.
No, it was on the Mall. Yeah.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay.
Same place. Yeah, cafe where it was, all the same.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It hadn't always been there, had it? I know it moved at some point. So.
Oh, but I think, yeah, maybe. But in my lifetime, it's always been there on the Mall. Yeah.
That sounds like a bit of a dream job to me.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a job again. You know, it's very different times. I mean, now there would be no way you'd be let near the art unless you had a degree in art history, a postgraduate diploma or an MA in curation. You know, you just wouldn't. You'd have to start, I don't know, as an intern making the tea for 3 years or something. But I just walked in. I saw Lynn there looking lovely, standing on a table putting up some Helmut Newton photos. Which someone came and threw paint on the next day or whatever. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. And just got chatting to her, and she said, "Here, hold this while you know." And I'm passing things, you know, up to her up on the ladder and help. And then she invited me around to dinner that night. She just said, "Oh, do you want to help me? I do these." She did these exhibitions in the kind of communal spaces, cafe and corridors. And she did that. She changed them once a month or something. I think it was a new exhibit and. So she just said, "Oh, well, do you want to come and help me when I'm doing the next one?" And then because I then met Ted, who was at the time programming an ethnographic film festival, I ended up helping him to program that and doing, you know, partly actually talking through the program with him and then physically, you know, tearing tickets in the cinema. Through being there, I met McLaren and Keith Allen, who were running the theatre. So they said, "Oh, yeah, we sometimes need people." So, you know, I'd go in and be helping assistant. Mike Lay was the sort of theatre manager and Keith Allen was the stage manager, and I was kind of like Keith Allen's assistant, I suppose. So I was the assistant stage manager. But you know, we had this kind of fantastic year, 1976, when the ICA really was doing what an Institute of Contemporary Arts actually should be doing, you know, which is just looking for where the cutting edge is and getting the artists in and giving the artists responsibility for things. So Ted Little, who was another Ted, two Teds, Ted Little, who ran the ICA at the time, he'd come from the Birmingham Arts Lab. So there's this whole thing, you probably know about the Beckenham Arts Lab, or neck of the woods. I mean, there was this whole thing in the sort of late 1960s, early 1970s of the Arts Lab, which are kind of artist-led spaces all around the country. I think Jen and Cozy were involved in one in Hull as well. So there were lots of them around the country. And so So Ted Little was running the ICA as if it was a local arts lab, you know, like a London-based arts lab, which was fantastic because he basically just gave bits of the space over to people, or just let people that were running things just run with it. So we were allowed in the theatre, well, we were not only allowed to just program really brilliant experimental theatre, so Lumiere and Sun and Crystal Theatre, the Saint and the People Show and Hot Peaches from New York, and you know, all of these fantastic companies. But we were allowed to use the theatre space after the theatre show's finished to put on gigs. You know, there was no like, oh, you need a special license to do that, you need permission from 20 people and some sort of, you know, letters of approval. No, just, oh yeah, the space is there, use the space. So we put on The Clash, Subway Sex, Suburban Studs, can't remember who else, but we did quite a few, you know, we did a few nights there. One of them, the famous one where Shane got his ear bitten by a Modette.
Right, yes.
Another famous moment, Patti Smith dancing at the front of The Clash, yeah. So, yeah, this is all good stuff, you know, so the ICA, and then of course, towards the end of 1976 came the Prostitution exhibition, which changed everything.
How do you pronounce? Is it Coum or Coum or transmissions?
Say it different ways, yeah. Coum transmissions, but it depends if you've got a northern accent. You have to ask somebody. You have to ask somebody from Hull, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had this conversation yesterday about whether it was chakras or chakras, and yeah, same sort of thing, really.
Yeah, chakras, I think, but yeah, I don't think it's not one of those. It doesn't matter too much, I don't think, because it's
Right. Yeah.
kind of in between the two when you say it with a Hull accent.
Right. So yes, okay. That seems to be. We've reached the interesting point in time now, haven't we? Really, just before. Oh, well, just when punk rock's kind of about to make itself known to the nation.
Everything happened within 2 months. You know, it was extraordinary. Yeah, everything just went, exploded into the public domain. So from being a very interesting alternative counterculture thing that was taking place in art galleries and gay clubs and small, you know, venues and all the rest of it, you suddenly had something that's on the front pages of the national newspapers. So you had the Prostitution exhibition, the opening, which famously MP Nicholas Fairbairn brought questions to the House of Commons and used the phrase that's been repeated often since, which is, these people are the wreckers of civilization. Yes, thank you. You know, you can't ask for anything better.
No, you couldn't buy publicity like that, could you?
No, and so because it's the way Coum Transmissions worked as an art group, they as the reviews and the outrage and the front page headlines came in, those all got, you know, we cut them all out and we you know, stuck them on the wall, so they became part of the exhibition. So it became a moving exhibition, you know, that shifted and grew. So you didn't just have the original material, which is all these kind of knives and chains and used tampons and porn pictures, etc., etc. So you had all that stuff, and then you had all the responses to it, which actually took up more room than the original artifacts by the end of it. So that, you know, becomes art reflecting on itself, or art will eat itself, maybe.
Yeah, surely.
It was fantastic. The response was fantastic. It was all lovely and wonderful and exciting, but everybody got sacked. Everybody got into trouble. Basically, the ICA just lost, you know, great big. I don't know how much funding it got, but Arts Council Great Britain, as it was called then, just basically hauled Ted Little up into, you know, an important meeting, and the long and the short of that was, you know, you need to leave. I don't know quite actually if that was what was said. I don't know if you said they said you need to stop all this and completely change what the ICA is doing, or, you know, you'll have to leave, or whether they said you have to leave, or whether he said, if I can't carry on doing what I want to do, I will leave. So I'm not sure. I wasn't there, you know, in those, behind those closed doors. So the long and the short of it is, by the end of the year, Ted Little and quite a lot of the rest of us were either gone or had been, you know, handcuffed.
And not in a good way, yeah.
Not
So,
any.
when did you first see the Pistols then? I'm trying to look at all these different strands that are coming in, as you say, within the space of a
Yeah,
month.
so I first saw them in I think it's spring. I've got all this written down. It's in the book. It's in the book. Read the book. I should know. It was spring 1976, so it was possibly around about February or March or April. Yeah. I did look it up, and I did get the date right in the book, whatever date it was, but I've immediately forgotten. But it was around anyway. It was spring 1976, so it was before they'd done any of the 100 Club, you know, residencies. And I saw them at the Babaloo Club in Finchley.
Right, yeah.
No, Finchley Road.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's a tiny disco, and there was basically, you know, a dozen, whatever you want to call them, Bromley contingent, early Sex Pistols fans. And there was me and Ted Polhemus, and then there was a few people drinking by the bar who shouted out rubbish or something occasionally, and Johnny Rotten just got off the stage and came over and spoke to them about, you know, an inch from their faces, and sort of backed people against walls and things. So, which I thought was a fantastic piece of kind of performance art, really. I mean, it's also partly the way Ted Polhemus had presented it to me. He was friends with Malcolm and Vivian, and he said, "Oh, Malcolm's got this new, you know, art game kind of thing. He's got these working class lads, and he's turned them into a, you know, a rock group, and you know, it's all a bit of a wheeze kind of thing." So, yeah, I think at the time, I don't know, but I did think it was a fantastic piece of performance art, but I did actually think the music for me was more interesting than I was expecting it to be. So enough to make me want to go back again. I only saw them 3 times, I think, in total. So busy with other things. Yeah, so it was Babaloo Club. I saw one of the 100 Club, either May or June. You can see I'm marvellous with dates. I'm just like, oh, when was that? That's why I'm thinking the Babaloo Club must have been before May, because then I saw them in either May or June, because they did a few kind of, is it Tuesday? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was kind of weekday. They did a few weeks in a row. I used to know Ron Watts from years ago, from when I used to work in a record shop. A big bookshop that was also a record shop. So I was always interested in anything he was up to anyway. So he was a person that ran the 100 Club and was very keen to promote this new thing that was happening. And then I saw them at Notre Dame Hall, which was just weeks before the dreaded, you know, Bill Grundy thing. Yeah.
There's a bit of you being interviewed, I think, on London Weekend Show. Is that?
There is, that got used in the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Yeah. Yeah, that was one of those. I did say a lot of really intelligent things about sort of Dada and surrealism and situationism, God knows what else. And then somebody, you know, said something, and I just sort of swore at them and went a bit, you know. Of course, that's the bit they keep.
Yeah, sod's law, isn't that? Yeah. I'm quite fascinated by this sort of all these different. I don't know if you call them social scenes or what, really, but you know, I'm quite fascinated about the different things you were being exposed to at this point. So you've got the Pistols, you've got Throbbing Gristle, or Coum Transmissions, you've got gay scene, and you've also got the nascent Adam and the Ants, of course, as well. I presume these are all kind of happening around the same time.
Yeah, the whole Ants thing is slightly later. It's kind of more winter of 76 into early 77. Basically, I met Andy and Bid, who were schoolboys playing in a band together. That band became the Monochrome Set. But in between, there was a band with no name that split into the ants, the Monochrome Set. So Bid and Andy, when I first met them, they just bizarrely really just said to me, oh, they need a drummer in their band and maybe I'd like to be their drummer. And I sort of said, I don't play drums and I don't have a drum kit, but they didn't seem to think any of that. I knew that was very important, you know, in the spirit of the times. So they invited me to come along and rehearse. So I went to Andy's house, which is in Balham, or Clapham South, Balham. Didn't have a drum kit, but I did have a tambourine. And at the time, both Bid and Stuart, as he was called then, were the singers in this band. So we're doing some of Bid's songs, some of Stuart/Adam's songs. And, you know, I was just sort of clapping and playing my tambourine and, you know, but one thing that did come out of that is because they couldn't come in on time on this song called Dirk Wears White Socks, because normally it would be like a, you know, the bass drum that would do the like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
So I did a clapped 4 times and I shouted out, Dirk wears white socks, and then they all came in on time. So Adam, as he became later, said, oh well, I like that. I think even when we've got you a drum kit, we'll keep that because it's a nice start. So he always did that live. Shouted out Dirk wears white socks. Yeah, so that was the beginning. But of course Andy and Bid and Stuart were just completely different songwriters and completely different temperaments. So you could just feel that the chances of that working were very low. And then Stuart disappeared. Obviously, I know now that he had anorexia, that he had a mental breakdown, that later got diagnosed as bipolar. But none of that was known at the time, and this is you know, the 1970s, when people don't talk about any of these sort of things. So and especially when, you know, people are like 18 or something, it's just not, you know. I think yeah, Bid and Andy had just left school and were 18. I think Adam and I was about 20, 21, yeah, something like that, and he's around about the same age as me. Yeah, so he disappeared. I did get a drum kit. And I rehearsed with Andy and Bid. Tom, who later changed his name to Leicester Square, who was the guitarist, didn't rehearse with us because I think he was still at art school at the time. So this is that's basically how I learnt, in as much as I learnt anything, to play, just playing with Bid and Andy, and you know, weekdays in a front room with my little pearl Maxine silver drum kit. So yeah. And then a couple of months later, Stuart reappeared. I met up with him somewhere. He asked for my phone number. He then phoned me up nightly to tell me about all his plans and how he's going to change his name and how he's going to become a world famous pop star and how he's going to completely get rid of his, you know, quiet, shy, ill persona and be reborn as Adam, a new man. And it was all just seemed like just you know, almost felt sorry for him. It sounded like such a weird fantasy for somebody who was kind of ill and skinny and shy, and I was just like, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
But you know, he did it. We know the rest is history, as they say. He did it. Yeah.
So it sounds like there was no sense when you were playing with Bid and Adam, there was no sense that they were going to go on to greater things.
Well, we were just, you know, I mean, certainly for me, I think with Bid and Andy, they'd been playing together and writing songs for years. The things that became the first couple of Monochrome Set albums, I mean, they were doing those when they were 14 or 15, you know, their songs.
Right.
So there wasn't any kind of sense of or desire for massive pop stardom, I think, from Andy or Bid. So more that they were just doing what they did. But Adam did manage to persuade Andy to leave Bid and come and join this new thing, which was going to be called the Ants, which he did, and yeah, so that was his trajectory for the next couple of years. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? With hindsight, now it seems like Andy and Bid were always destined to be in a band together, because they were in a band together before the Ants. And then when the Ants split up, you know, had the whole Ants Bow Wow Wow thing, then Andy immediately, you know, went back to Bid and, you know, carried on and has done ever since. So now it seems like, oh yes, that was his destiny. But yeah, it could have gone either way. I mean, when Rema Rema split, and when Adam turned up at Marco's store and persuaded Marco to join forces with him, they that was all very much with Andy's approval. I mean, I found out years later that that it was Andy who gave Marco's address to Adam. So when he went, and I was sort of staying at Marco's half the week at the time, the rest of the time in Exhibition Road with Andy. So it was kind of with Andy's blessing. And then Andy and Marco, I mean, Adam and Marco did ask Andy if he'd join up with them in the new Ants, and he decided not to. So it could have, you know, that could have gone a different way as well. Yeah.
And you were in a relationship with Andy at this point. So is this when you moved into Exhibition Road?
No, we'd already been there for about 5 years. No, how many years? I don't know. We moved in there in 77. Right. We lived together there until we moved out in 1982. But at some point we kind of, the relationship shifted, and so I was going out with Marco for quite a few years, and from all the time I was in Rema Rema and all the time of the early Kings of the Wild Frontier days. Yeah.
I had a look at Exhibition Road on Google Maps, and I couldn't help thinking, well, firstly, these days, of course, you wouldn't be able to get near a place like that financially, I would say, you know. No. Not you personally, but, you know, but I'm quite fascinated as to how you, it's right near the British Museum, isn't it? It's in the...
No, it's the V&A Museum.
V&A, I beg your pardon.
And it's opposite the Science Museum, where that funny tunnel...
Yeah.
Comes out. Yeah.
Various embassies around there and all that sort of stuff, if I remember.
Those houses, that row of houses, which is called Prince's Gate, all on that side of the road, they were incredibly run down. I mean, they were all, you know, infested with mice and completely wrecked. So we were paying, I mean, when I first moved in there in 1976, end of 76, then I was paying, I think, £9 a week. I think when Andy came to live with me and we moved to a much bigger room, kind of big sort of, I don't know, you'd call it a studio flat these days, you know, a great big room with 2 big windows and a little kitchenette in one corner and bedroom area and a table and chairs and all that kind of thing, quite a decent sized room. That was like £12 a week. I mean, obviously £12 a week was a lot more, you know. It's not like £12 a week now, but nevertheless, it was. I mean, even for those days, it was quite cheap rent. You know, one up from squatting kind of thing.
Definitely, yeah.
But there was loads of cheap property around. It was really run-down area, South Kensington. Right. Yeah,
it's not that different to Notting Hill, perhaps, in the way it was.
Yeah. The same with Notting Hill. It was really cheap. There was one posh bit by Holland Park, but the rest of Notting Hill was really rough and dirt cheap. Yeah.
There's one question that I've I don't really write down questions, but I've written down this one.
Yeah.
In Hampstead, Adamant sings "I changed the line for you, Maxine." Is that you? And do you remember what the original line was?
Yeah, it is, but I can't remember what none of us can remember what the original line is. I have asked Andy. Because I quote that in the 69 Exhibition Road book, you know.
Ah, right, cool.
Yeah. I quote that as an example of how I was like continued to be, for quite a while anyway, a kind of muse and influence, if you like, on the because yeah, as I say, Adam used to phone me up sort of daily in Exhibition Road and tell me about all his plans. And then when he did form the group, he still I mean, I'm not for a minute saying I was the only muse. I think there was quite a lot of us, and obviously Jordan then became a kind of major influence. But yeah, I did. I can't remember. That's the problem. I can't remember what the original line was, but it was something rubbish. So I said, you can't say that. So then the next time I heard them doing the song, he just put in, I changed this line for you, Maxie. Yeah.
That's quite a fantastic way to deal with it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, just like, oh, she doesn't like that, so I'd just say, I changed the line for you.
Did you go to a lot of Ants gigs then when they were doing a lot of gigs before they were famous?
Yeah, I went to everything in the first year, including some in. I was talking to Simon Fisher Turner, just trying to sort of see if I could get any, because he was their driver before he became a famous musician. And I was just asking him about sort of memories of things, and he's not very good with dates and times, but he said, I do remember driving to somewhere, possibly Wales, but definitely as far as Liverpool, with and he said, I just remember Andy sitting on your lap the whole way. So, so there's a lot of that kind of sitting crowded in the back of no seatbelts, obviously, in the back of vans going off to. Yeah, I mean, it was certainly that whole of that from when they started, which was May 1977 at the ICA, where I got this gig for what was supposed to be the band that involved Bid, and ended up handing it over to Adam. Yeah, so that was May 1977. And yeah, I probably went to everything, almost everything or almost everything for a good year, until a year later when I joined up with the other Rema Remas to form Rema Rema. So of course by the middle of 1978, I now have my own band to worry about. So my energy shifted. Yeah.
So tell me about Rema Rema. What was where did you perceive yourself to fit in with what was going on around you?
As a band,
sorry, yeah.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question, actually, because there's a whole film about that very thing, which is just coming out, made by Marco Portia, which is kind of an odd documentary because there is no live footage of this. But that becomes then the kind of core of the documentary, the fact that we're this sort of ephemeral thing that a lot of people really, really loved, but we never quite kind of got up there with other post-punk names, partly because we split up after a year. I mean, we took it really, really slowly. So we formed in kind of early summer 1978, and then we spent the rest of that year, so it's like 6 months, just creating music, just the 5 of us. We did all-night sessions in a rehearsal studio on Holloway Road, and then we actually we went to this space in Portobello Road and did some recordings on a TAC 4 track that we borrowed off Hazel O'Connor. Yeah, we were quite internal. We seemed to be, we just didn't seem to be in any sort of hurry to play live. And I think it was partly because we just didn't want to do the circuit, we just didn't want to be a rock band. I mean, everybody by then, because we'd all been involved in the sort of early punk thing, Pistols thing, and because everything had gone completely pear-shaped by now, sort of Sid's death. Marco was a close friend of Sid's, but then hadn't seen him in the months before he died because he'd just become a lunatic that you wouldn't want to spend any time with. Everybody was really unhappy about the whole way that the Sex Pistols had gone anyway, and just didn't want, we were all kind of really pulling away, and the way we dressed and everything, we just really didn't want to look like that or be part of that. So yeah, but on the other hand, we really didn't particularly like. I mean, it's quite interesting in this new film that Marco Portia's made. There's quite a lot of mention of things like Joy Division, and I was, to be honest, I was a bit like, oh no, because that was one of the reasons Marco left, and we never really liked those sort of comparisons. We didn't feel that that's what we were doing. I don't know what we thought we were doing, but it wasn't that. And okay, I know I'm sort of biased because I was in the band, but I do think we had something that was kind of quite special and different because we had all the kind of experimental, keyboards and synths and sounds and things, but then we had this sort of this whole thing of bass and drums taking a lead on a lot of songs, so it's kind of rhythm driven, and then of course we have Marco, who's just got this extraordinary ability, fantastic guitar sound. And with these amazing, strong, rich, effects and all the feedback and the pedals and things like that, which I think made it very a lot of guitar in other bands was kind of quite ding 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 ding, and this was just like being run over by a steamroller, really.
You often hear Marco talking about how punk was over by whenever, earlier on than most people had heard of it, put it that way. And is that something you shared? Was that a feeling you shared?
Yeah, end of 76. Well, there was the whole response of the world to the Bill Grundy thing, and the fact that people now had a rude name to call you and to shout at you, the fact people were getting beaten up because of the way they looked. Then the whole thing of Glenn leaving the Pistols and bringing in Sid Vicious, who, I mean, I think it's just, I don't know, I still can't think, can't even put it into words. I can't think how anyone could have thought that was something that was going to work. It was just such a horrible thing. And obviously he just couldn't handle it and he was on self-destruct, but he shouldn't have been put in that position. Nobody should have done that. Awful, and the Clash signed CBS. I mean, Mark Pierce, Sniffing Glue, his definition of the end of punk was it was like New Year 1977. The Clash signed to CBS. It's dead. That's not what it was supposed to be about,
What was it supposed to be about?
Well, I think in a way, what it was, which was people creating their own, you look at the fantastic things like the Buzzcock singles, Orgasm Addict with the beautiful artist work on the cover and, creating, making small, setting up, right? It was DIY, Sniffing Glue, here's 3 chords, start a band, it was the whole DIY thing. It was the whole counterculture thing. It was the fact that it merged music and art and alternative living. It was very feminist in its early days. It was very gay. There was all the gay punk disco crossover. Where did Disco Sucks come from? Punk started in tandem with disco in the gay clubs, So suddenly this thing that was about actually breaking down barriers. And to me, the thing that absolutely that punk was about was DIY. Do not wait for somebody to give you permission to write a book, to draw a paint, to paint a painting, to form a band, to put on a piece of performance art, to just do it. You don't need permission of record companies, A&R man, venues, art galleries, anything. So I think in some ways, certainly for some of us, I mean, Mark Cox and I were both fans of Throbbing Gristle, and obviously I was a very close friend of Jen's. So I kind of felt that although they often distanced themselves from punk and didn't feel themselves to be part of the punk movement, I mean, what they've got in common and then what they took and really ran with was the idea of not being given permission from other people to do things and to just doing it all yourself. So, run your own record label, create your own artwork, press your own records, set up your own gigs, Yeah. So definitely, yeah, I'd maybe, back up Mark Perry with the day that I didn't like the Clash. Oh, I shouldn't have said it, but I was friends with Mick Jones, but the Clash music was not my taste. Yeah, particularly.
Just before we move on to Sidekick TV, just one final thing. You said a little while back in our chat that Ted Palimas had presented the Pistols to you as kind of a Malcolm McLaren art project.
Yeah.
Is that how you look back on it?
Well, it kind of was and it wasn't, because I certainly saw that, and as it was framed in that way when I saw them at the Babaloo Club on Finchley Road, I was like, oh yeah, this is amusing. You've got this whole setup, of people who are not tutored musicians, making this wild sound. But as a Velvet Underground fan, I saw something else. I didn't see it as just that. I saw it as oh well, I'm actually really interested in the sounds they're making anyway. And so I think that was the beauty of them, really. I think they were much more interesting. I think they're more interesting musically than Malcolm realized, perhaps, because I think he just wasn't thinking about it at all. I don't think he was particularly that I don't know. I never really knew him very well, so I don't know what he thought, but yeah.
Okay. So Rema Rema, why did you split up in Rema Rema then? What happened there?
Marco left. That's just as simple as that. Marco left, and we felt, as I say, we were very insular. We did loads and loads of things together all the time. We spent a lot of time together. We just made music for ourselves. We only played publicly 11 times in a year. So, Marco was just didn't like the fact that some people were comparing it to things like Joy Division and whatever, but he just felt it was getting a bit dirgy. I don't know if he's I don't know. I don't know if it was. I don't know if it shifted at all or whether he changed, but he wanted something more like Roxy music or whatever. He wanted something that had experimental sound in it but had a pop sensibility. And he felt that I felt that we had and we could have had. I think if we had stayed together and we'd continued to play together and to work on it, I think it could have easily. I think a lot of this I can sing along to them anyway. Rema Rema, I think there are plenty of tracks that have pop sensibility, but also the experimental sound. I will also say that Marco absolutely hated Throbbing Gristle, and he was very because I was going out with him at the time as well. He was I don't know, he just took against Genesis quite strongly. I think he didn't like me spending time with him, and yeah. So there was all sorts of stuff there as well. He didn't want to be part. He didn't really like any of that kind of TG, the Cabs, all of that stuff, which I really loved. Mark Cox really loved. So there sort of some of us in Rema Rema were very happy to be associated with that side of it all, but not Marco. Yeah. And then the big crunch that sort of shifted everything was the Banshee, the big Banshee. We were supposed to go on tour with the Banshees. We were friends with them, and we were supposed to be touring with them. And then John and Kenny ran away, although where they ran away to was our manager's house. So all the music paper was like, oh, where are they? And it's like, Alperton. So, and then that all got really weird because Siouxsie asked Marco if he'd step in for a few gigs. So we had half the band were actually sheltering John and Kenny and keeping them secret, and the other half, and then Marco's, playing with Siouxsie. I mean, it was just a real weird. So that was actually the final straw. I mean, I think there was no way it could kind of. We did try and carry on after that, and funnily enough, we did record what became the Wheel and the Roses single. We recorded that in November 1979, even after all the kerfuffle with the Banshees and all this sort of strange stuff, and Marco deciding he was going to leave. But we did this odd thing of like recording a record knowing that we were actually going to stop working together. yeah. And I carried on afterwards with them very briefly, as they very kindly, they were very nice and sort of said, oh well, we should all carry on anyway, but we won't call it Rema Rema because we all agreed that Rema Rema had to be just the five of us. So when Marco left, I did play for a short while. I didn't do any live gigs, but we rehearsed together, but it just didn't feel right for me, so I left.
How did you feel in 1980? In the sense of you'd been through this incredible time, which was now perceived to be over, as in punk I'm talking about,
Yeah.
and then Rema Rema had split up as well, so you'd sort of gone through the whole post-punk thing as well. Did it feel like the end of something, or did it?
Yeah, and then when I got to a point when the L trains, when I left the L trains, I not deliberately but temporarily left my drum kit in the rehearsal studio that we were using in Carburton Street, which was at the time sort of semi-squats. It's just around the corner from Warren Street off Tottenham Court Road.
Mm.
And the next time I asked after it, nobody knew because the rehearsal studio had closed down and those houses were being converted into property, London property, so that was a real, that was, I mean, obviously I could have like gone and bought another drum kit, but it felt like, oh, okay. And that's when we left Exhibition Road, and that's when I split up with Marco as well. So it's sort of, so Andy and I stopped living together. I split up with Marco. I lost my drum kit, and then I started training as a dance teacher, and which became a really, really full time. I was working from midday till midnight every day. So I've also kind of given up all the cabaret dancing and the go-go dancing and striptease and all of that stuff. I remember I phoned up my agent and said I need to take a few weeks off, and he said there'll always be a job for you. Just phone me when you want to come back. And I've had weird dreams, over the decades since then of phoning up and going back, like 60-year-old stricker with a a suitcase full of moth-eaten.
Yeah, niche market. So you trained as a dance teacher. Are you still in London at this point, presumably?
Yes. So I've left Exhibition Road, but I'm now this is a bit odd. I'm now living with Marco's parents while Marco's on permanent tour with the Ants in America. Yeah. So it's just that even though we weren't going out together, they'd sort of for a long time treated me as a kind of daughter-in-law. So and it was weird because they kept, like, I went to Italy with them quite a few times, and over the rest of the 1980s, and it's like they still kept introducing me to people as Marco's fiance. And I'm just like, oh.
Yeah.
You don't want to be rude. You're with like, having a nice kind of glass of wine and a piece of cake in an Italian family, house, and someone say, hey, la Max, la bionda è la fidanzata di Marco. I'd be like, fidanzata, not quite, amiga, I'd sort of try and downplay it, just like friend, not fiance. So that was all another kind of funny thing, So I stayed, I stayed, well, I don't know if you count Harrow as London, but I stayed living in Harrow. And I went there supposedly for a few weeks while I found somewhere else to live. And it was like, they wouldn't take any money, and it was really comfortable, and they fed me. And so I did actually stay a couple of years nearly. I did a couple of short lets in other places. I went away for a few months and came back again. But basically that was my base for the next 2 years. Yeah.
Must be almost a culture shock, I would think, to move from central London out to Harrow.
Everything there was a culture shock. I'd left Exhibition Road. I'd stopped playing drums. I'd stopped working as a go-go dancer and stripper. I wasn't doing any cabaret dancing. I was just working absolutely, say, often 12 hours a day, training and teaching in these 2 dance studios, Arthur Murray's in the Strand and one in Kensington. So this became my life, you know, and then occasionally went to might perhaps go to a club, you know, afterwards. Yeah, but you know, there's places like Heaven are open by now. And, yeah, Dial, whatever it was for Dolphins, Perry's thing. Oh, I don't know. And Steve Strange was doing various things at Camden Palace, whatever. So yeah, I kind of occasionally went to something, but I was mostly kind of focusing on this other new life.
So your life had changed quite a lot then, in an experiential sense, I would think.
Yeah, because I'm just doing these other things, you know, for hours and hours every day. Yeah.
That seems like almost like the timeline that should lead us to the present day. But then we have psychic TV coming in that.
Yeah.
How did that work?
How did that work? Well, when I did the I Confess Softness record with Alex Ferguson and Genesis P Orridge, that was at a point where Jen was talking about wanted a new, more psychedelic poppy kind of band. He was sort of fed up with all the bleary darkness, so he claimed, of TG and all of that. He wanted something more colourful, something with tunes. So actually, with hindsight, that doing that single, that was the beginning of Psychic TV, because that was Alex and Jen writing tuneful songs together.
Right.
And that just happened to be 2 of the tunes. And Jen did move the idea that I played that we start a band, and I played drums with him and Alex. And I had little kind of alarm bells ringing because I was just really close friends with him, but I could also see some of the things that happened with other people, and I just felt it was all very well doing a one-off single that felt fine, but to actually be, you know, full-time in a band with him, that could be odd, not work, which proved to be the case. so I kind of you know, I stepped back from the idea of being in a band with Jen and Alex in 1980. At the same time, Jen was mooting this idea of a TV show, a TV broadcast that was on from midnight to 1 a.m., just 1 hour every day, and was called Psychic TV and included music and films by all the people that he loved, you know. So, but that they were actually 2 separate ideas at the time. So he had that, which he was going to pursue with Siouxsie, and that was going to be called Psychic TV. And then there was going to be this psychedelic band with very tuneful, you know, tuneful songs. And then sort of somehow those 2 things ended up actually being merged together. So we had this rather bizarre, I always thought rather bizarre thing of having, you know, Alex Ferguson's tuneful songs mixed with Siouxsie's, you know, ideas on sound and vision and whatever. So it was a bit of an odd combo. So that was kind of there. That's the backstory. And then a couple of years later, and then I didn't sort of, because I was busy with all this dance stuff, I didn't see very much of anybody at all for a long time. And then but I kept in kind of vague contact with Jen. Yeah, and then I just ended up meeting up with him in 1984. Can't remember at what point, but him saying he wanted to put together a band of all his favorite people. So he wanted me in it. He wanted Hilmar Örn Hilmarsson, who from Iceland. He wanted Monty Kazaza to come over from America, and you know, yeah. So that was, and Drew McDowell was in it. He's never a named member, but he was just as important as anyone else. He did all the kind of tapes as they were then, sort of sound samples. Yeah. So, and Alex, of course, was still in there, songwriting and playing guitar. Paula was out of it at the time because she was pregnant with Janess. Yeah. So this was the sort of the dream lineup apparently that Jen really wanted. But it fell apart quite quickly. I mean, it's all very well having all your best friends and favourite people in a band with you, but if it's not on an egalitarian basis, then it's not going to work. So Monty ran away quite early. I think by May, by May 1985, Monty had gone back to America. Sort of Monty's a great avoider of conflict, so I think he just realised that it was good to go. Yeah, Hilmar and I got sacked that autumn.
It wasn't a normal band, was it? It wasn't your average kind of like make a record, do a tour type outfit.
Yeah.
Largely because of Genesis, I presume. Who is quite a controversial figure, isn't he?
Yeah.
In Cozy's book, for instance, it's there's some pretty unpleasant stuff and so on. Did you enjoy that time?
Yeah, it was a great year actually. I mean, I forged friendships with Monty and Hilmar that were very long term. Hilmar I saw quite recently in Reykjavik, has remained really important. Yeah, person both as an artist and as a person. I mean, he's done amazing things. He's he's kind of like the godfather of everything that's happened in Iceland, really. From Sugar Cubes, Björk, through to Sigur Rós, through to like almost anybody that you know of from Iceland, you'll find a Hilmar connection. He's either kind of mentored them or produced them or kind of somehow got people together, and he's head of the pagan church. He's like the pagan pope of Iceland.
Brilliant title.
And he hates Genesis he hates Jen. I mean, when I told him that Jen had died, I can't remember. I don't know how it came up about him being cremated rather than buried. He said it's a shame that there isn't a grave to dance and piss on.
Right, yeah. That's
but
pretty off the fence, yeah.
But he blames Jen for producer Ken Thomas, who just he never got paid. Well, none of us got paid, but Ken Thomas gave his all to Psychic TV, and nearly lost his wife and home over debt because of not being paid for years and years of work. And there's loads of stuff, there's loads of stuff. So I can I try and stay fairly neutral on it all. I mean, I didn't witness the things that Cozy wrote about. I'm not denying for a minute that things happened, but I'm just saying personally, I didn't. And I was friends with Jen. I suppose all that proves is that you just don't know what's going on behind closed doors, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. I still hold on to the thing of just trying not to go too far down the road with assigning blame for things that you haven't actually witnessed. Or I don't know. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because then you don't want to deny other people's experiences. But
you strike me as a very conciliatory person in this kind of respect. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I was certainly like a lot of people. I was certainly taken aback by a lot of things that Cozy said. I was particularly taken aback by the fact because I was actually in that house a lot of the time. I mean, I was there at least once a week, for a whole afternoon. And a lot of the time, Cozy wasn't there actually because I suppose I missed all a lot of the key things that she was. Yeah, by the time that I became really close to Jen was when she was already with Chris, and he was wanting to wind up. That was whole part of the thing. He was wanting to wind up Throbbing Gristle because, Cozy wasn't there at Beck Road a lot of the time, and and he felt that it had all, needed to be just chopped. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe I missed the fun and fireworks.
Maybe that's a good thing. Um, is the end of Psychic TV, is that the end of you being in bands? Or was there more?
It was because I then had it. It mostly was because I then had three children 3 years apart, and I was very much a not that I intended this from the start. I started off with me and Foz. Foz, you might partner husband Foz was in the Monochrome Set as well, but at a different time, the sort of more 83, 84 time. So he was in the Monochrome Set when I met him.
Okay.
I met him through Andy. So it's basically Andy's the catalyst in my life that introduces me
Yeah,
to jobs and people and things. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Why am I talking about that? What am I saying? Oh, about playing drums and babies. Yeah. So, so Foz and I had our first child in 1986. Gabriel was born in August 1986. In fact, Foz was in Iceland with David Tibet and Einar and Björk and various other people making music. And I went supposedly into labour in July. Baby was due in August, and Foz had to be flown home from some military airport in Reykjavik. And then by the time he got back to London, the labour had stopped. It turned out to be a false alarm. So, oh, and Rose McDowell, Rose, lovely Rose was there as well. So, and Akiko, filmmaker Akiko Hado. Yeah. So that's so Foz also continued to do things. They made a record called The Aryan Aquarians, but that might not have been there. That might have been, oh, I don't know. I lose track. I can't remember what they did. Anyway, he was doing loads of music with all of the Icelanders, all that crew. At the time that I was thinking I was having a baby, but as it happened, the baby waited another month after the emergency return of Foz.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, we started off thinking we'd be kind of quite equal in the parenting, but our babies had other plans. So I ended up being that real earth mother, long-term breastfeeding, sort of, you know, baby sleeping in the bed, kind of, you know, sending them to the Steiner school, which is basically don't even go to school till they're 7.
So you're in Brighton by now.
We were in London when we had the first child, and then we moved to Brighton when he was 2, and then I was pregnant with the next one. Yeah.
Right.
And as it happened, Jan and Paula moved to just round the corner in
Yeah.
Brighton. So I did kind of heal the rift.
And their kids also went to the Steiner school, didn't
I
they?
did briefly, yeah. Yeah, so the children played together and yeah, you know, kind of continued to, yeah, we sort of you know, made it up, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, no, I didn't. I hadn't properly answered your question, had I? So basically, I was, you know, more or less. I did a few bits of dance and performance art kind of things at the Zap Club. Um, uh, after, between the second and the third child, I kind of dragged myself off of the sofa and did some kind of quite interesting performance art sort of contemporary dance, upstroke art work with somebody called Ginny Farman. And we did a residency at the Zap, a kind of alternative nightclub thing with loads of strange goings on, you know, dangling from trapezes with covered in yellow body paint and feathers, that type of stuff. So I did a bit of that, but then I had another baby, and you know, yeah. And then when I finally emerged from all that, my emphasis was mostly on experimental theatre and performance art and dance. I went much more strongly down that line. Did very briefly form a Brighton band. It was called Cowboy Beyonder. Cowboy Beyonder. Is it masculine or feminine? I don't know. Anyway, that didn't last long. Yeah.
I was going to ask you regarding the dance thing, if there was any kind of connection or parallels with the world of Strictly and so on, but it sounds like the answer is no, is it?
Well, I did teach ballroom dance. I mean,
Okay.
it's one of the things I did, and until actually quite recently, and sort of in corporate, you know, or quite often did performances that used things like dance rhythms like tango or whatever, and actually sort of corrupt, if you like, and subvert them, and integrate them into other things. But I actually hate Strictly and never watch it.
Really?
Yeah, it just yeah.
Does it represent a different culture to you?
Yeah, yeah. I really don't like it. I don't know. Sometimes out of, if somebody mentions that there was a particularly good routine, I'll just watch the routine on YouTube, just to see what people are talking about. But I hate all the judging and all the stuff in between. And then my son's best friend, Seann Walsh, who's a comedian, was on Strictly, and he ended up, being slaughtered by the press. He was the person that had the famous, kiss with his
Okay, yeah.
dance partner. But and then just got, so that's turned my hatred of Strictly to venomous hatred. Because Seann is lovely, and there was it was a kiss, for God's sake. It's not,
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how I think it's unbelievable how he was treated by the press and by other people. But we probably ought not to talk too much about that. It just makes me seethe.
Okay, let's move on to something happy.
Let's get away from Strictly.
So, from what I see on sort of Facebook and so on, basically you've got Total Theatre magazine, website, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
And your life, your public life, shall we say, certainly seems to be quite kind of revolving around kind of artistic stuff, around Spiegeltent stuff, and I'm quite jealous, actually. It seems like quite a sort of ideal creative life. Is that right?
It's funny, isn't it? Because I kind of often feel I'm not doing enough, and I don't. I mean, I did two things last year when we were sort of still in pandemic times. All the things had eased up a bit, obviously, but I got some money to kind of. There was the Arts Council had some grants for people. There was some grants for people who were affected by, whose work had been affected by COVID. So I got some money to, and all the sort of spiel I wrote to get that was all about, well, I've lost all my work as a performer making street theatre and dance stuff and whatever. So I need to do something else. I want to do much kind of small scale, intimate kind of installations and sound artwork, go back full circle to being, like as things were with early psychic, with psychic TV and interest in sound art and things. So I got some money, and I did a site responsive piece in a windmill in Rottingdean with Foz, because obviously it's easy to work with. He's got a music studio here anyway, and it's just kind of, in COVID times, it's easier to work with someone you're living with than to try and do collaborations with elsewhere. So we did that, and I was really pleased with that. We did that for about 6 or 7 weekends right through the sort of summer months, May, June, July, last year. And then I got a different fund from another Arts Council fund called Develop Your Creative Practice, and that was about much more about kind of rediscovering my musical roots and thinking about new collaborations. So I made a piece that was a response to the Undercliff walk between Rottingdean and Ovingdean, and I did lots of walking and lots of thinking and talking and writing, and then I sent pieces of written text to a number of different people, including Hilmar and Simon Fisher Turner, and they responded by creating pieces of music, and then Foz also, and there was another 2 people, and then we put all that together. But I was never quite sure what to do with it. I didn't know whether it gets made into a sort of walking performance or it's just sitting there at the moment. But I did it anyway. But and then I was supposedly intending to do lots more of that sort of thing, but I got kind of dragged back into the Spiegeltent and street theatre circuit this summer. But I've made it my last season. I'm retiring, hanging up my dance shoes.
Hey? Okay. Are you
Yeah.
retiring from everything, or?
Well, I just realised this year that it was really hard to do the things in tandem. Like last year, because there wasn't, because think 2020 to 21, because all the festivals were cancelled, because there wasn't the same gigs to do, performance stuff to do, then I that allowed me the space to write the book, which is coming out next month, to create the piece at the Windmill, to create the collaboration, the Undercliff collaboration with Foz and Hilmar and Simon and others, because there wasn't that other stuff. Whereas this year I've just gone back into, being a producer, director, choreographer, creator of, and it just takes up too much time and energy. And I just also do feel I kind of enjoy things when I do them, but it's, I keep ending up putting my back out or doing my shoulder in by carting big suitcases across the country on trains or in transit vans, So it feels the right time to stop it, quit while you're winning, I think.
So,
I almost did this year's season, the sort of street theatre season and whatever, to just because it was taken away from me by COVID. I didn't feel I'd made any sort of rational decision about whether I wanted to do this or not. It's like, oh, it was taken away, so I'll do other things. But now there was the chance for it to come back, so I did it again. But by doing it again, I kind of learned that actually I do want to give it up.
well, yeah, that's a good way of doing it, I suppose. And you wrote a book, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a lockdown book, although most of it had been written in some form in a few years before then. I mean, it kind of got written between 2015 and 2020, but it was in bits and pieces, like a kind of patchwork quilt that's never been sewn together. And some bits of it have been published in other places in some earlier version. So there's a bit in Richard's book, Punk is Dead, Modernity Killed Every Night. There's another bit in a Toby Mott book, Showboat, about punk sex bodies or something. There's bits of things that were magazine articles, So there's all this stuff that was kind of written in a truncated form or written for another purpose. When the first big lockdown happened in March 2020, and I had all my work taken away from me for the whole summer. I mean, not just me and the rest of the world, anybody works in performance or anything in direct engagement with the public, and obviously self-employed, so it's just like it's all gone. So obviously I sulked about that for a while. spent a couple of weeks chasing bookers, so trying to get my fees paid anyway, even though things were cancelled and all that kind of rubbish. But once I'd got over that, I just thought, oh, well, this is the time really. So I just sat down, pulled all the things out from the shelves, all those boxes full of things that were written for magazines or half written for another purpose or published in a shortened form elsewhere, and just turned it into something that was proper, full solid manuscript. Yeah, and it's coming out on Strange Attractor, who are a really nice company, small publishing house with lots of really interesting authors on their books, including Kathy Unsworth, who co-wrote Defying Gravity with Jordan. I mean, that one is actually on Omnibus, not on Strange Attractor, but Strange Attractor have lots of good stuff. And yeah, that's all happening. Yeah.
So what does the future hold now then?
More writing, really. Yeah, less dancing. More writing and more sound stuff. I really enjoyed doing both the site specific thing at Rottingdean Windmill and the performance walking stuff for the under.
The Rottingdean Windmill's got quite a lot of history, hasn't it? Because it was a smuggler's windmill, and
yeah,
it's a fascinating place to be doing something, I suppose.
No, it was really enjoyable process. So I just really with both of those projects, the fact that what they involved me just being by myself. I mean, they did ultimately involve collaborating with other people, but a lot of the process, the early stages of the process, were just me being by myself, you know, just walking and thinking and listening. And so yeah, I want to do more of that sort of stuff, really. So more sound stuff, whether you want to call it, you know, music or sound art or spoken word or whatever, but more of that sort of stuff and more writing, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I for one will really look forward to that. I think it's this has been absolutely fascinating. God, you've done so much, haven't you? That's pretty. Do you feel
I'm
like
old, Gerard. I'm old. I'm old. No,
yeah,
old.
quite a lot of people manage to get old without doing stuff, though, don't they? Do you feel
They have proper jobs and they don't have they have their mortgages paid off and they're not worried.
well?
There's
Yeah.
that, but, you know.
Do you feel fulfilled though, in terms of like what you've done so far?
Oh God, I don't know. Again, going back to Bowie and that Moon Age Daydream, you know, just there was one bit where I don't know if you've seen it, but there's one bit where they go, "Oh, you know, you're 33 years old and you've done like 17 out studio albums and you've done 4 films and you've done." And I thought, "Oh my God, yeah." So I know one shouldn't compare oneself, but there's this thing that comes up a lot for me, which I think it's just my thing in life, I suppose. It's this thing of being a dilettante, you know, being a butterfly. Because as you say, I have done so much, but it's like if I'd maybe just done one of those things, if I'd just like played drums, or or been a contemporary dancer, or stayed at being a cabaret dancer, or stayed at being an arts journalist, or stayed at writing non-fiction, or stayed at making sound art, you know, or you know, any of these kind of like dozens of things that I have done or do, you know, maybe I'd be absolutely amazingly world famous in one of them, as opposed to just I do flit around, but I think that's okay. That's what I am. So maybe that's all right. So I don't completely feel fulfilled. But then I think also if you feel fulfilled, if you feel like, oh, I've done it, I've done that, I've finished now, um, then that doesn't drive you to do anything else, does it? Whereas
Yeah,
at the moment, I've got a list of about 10 projects that are started in the sense of they're in my head, or started in the sense of they're in one of those boxes in scribbled notes, or there's something on the computer, or whatever. Yeah. So there's a kind of 80s memoir which I've done a few bits of, which would, if anybody wanted the follow up to 69 Exhibition Road, that would be it. I don't know if they ever would, but so there's the 80s memoir. There's a kind of whole thing about, oh, you know, yeah, sort of reflection on Irish heritage that I keep thinking about starting or doing bits of. And there's loads of performances that I did as actual physical live performances that I'm now looking at and thinking that I'd make a great radio broadcast or something. So that's another thing I've got in my head, is that some things that I've already done, or some ideas I had for live, instead of doing them live with all the hassle of like finding, you know, spaces to perform in and getting actors or performers or dancers, whatever, to just turn them into podcasts or sound broadcasts or something. So I might do that.
yeah. Well, sounds like you.
I know, I've got, yeah, I know, just get the head just buzzing the whole time.
Yeah, that's great. I think that'd be a good point to probably to leave it. I would say, unless you have anything else you would need to or
Uh,
want to talk about.
no, we've talked about a lot, haven't we?
We have, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, because I
oh,
found that absolutely fascinating.
thank you. We ought to meet up and have that cup of tea.
We should, yes,
Oh,
yeah,
you're in Lewis, aren't you? I,
yeah.
yeah,
Should I stop the recording perhaps, and we can discuss that? Yeah.
I can do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just say for the benefit of the podcast, then thank you ever so much, Max. Dorothy Max Prior. And your book is out soon, and I would recommend everyone gets it, because I certainly will.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, it's on pre-order at the moment for hardback with little goodie bag, and then it'll be in paperback beginning of 2023.
Brilliant. 69 Exhibition Road.
69 Exhibition Road.
Okay, thank you very much, Max.
Thank you. Bye.